Let's finish this section up by talking about health issues that are associated with excess or deficient amounts of protein consumption. There are significant portions of the world's population where people do not get sufficient amounts of protein. So you can have either protein energy malnutrition or protein calorie malnutrition. So you can be deficient in protein, you can be deficient in energy because of lack of protein, or you can be deficient in both. They encompass both kwashiorkor and marasmus, and sometimes kwashiorkor and marasmus overlap. PEM is bad in adults, and it is even worse in kids for a number of reasons. It leads to poor growth. It can lead to neurological issues. It can lead to weight loss. It can lead to wasting. Kids who are normal height but thin may actually have acute PEM, which means that they have had recent and severe food deprivation. Children who are short for their age may have experienced chronic PEM, which means they've been deprived of food over the long term, and particularly of protein. They are short because they have been unable to grow to their normal height. Poor growth due to PEM can be pretty easy to overlook because a small kid may look pretty normal, just a kid. And that is actually the common sign of protein malnutrition. PEM is going to be most common in those areas that are listed there. Despite the fact the US is considered an affluent country, we also have problems with PEM here. Homeless people, people who are of lower socioeconomic classes, the elderly who are on limited incomes, and adults who are addicted to drugs or alcohol may also have PEM. You may also see PEM in people who have chronic diseases like tuberculosis, like AIDS. It's kind of a double whammy if you have those kinds of infections because they deplete body proteins. They actually demand more energy because your body's trying to fight off the illness. And that can trigger nutrient losses and actually affect overall metabolic processing. When you are ill, particularly if you're chronically ill, you actually may have no desire to eat, which means that your consumption of protein, food in general, drops, which may impair things even more and make the healing process even more problematic. Sadly, PEM is also common in patients with eating disorders, including anorexia nervosa. So the prevention of PEM requires the patient to eat frequent, nutrient and energy-dense meals, and as important, if not more so, the actual resolution or fixing of the underlying primary cause. And if you look at the underlying primary causes listed there, poverty, addictions, infections, and illness, some of those are really, really, really hard to tackle. So if a person is diagnosed in time, you can actually save a person with the appropriate nutritional intervention. You have to really carefully correlate the nutrition intake with what the person needs and with sufficient amounts of water consumption in order for that person to get back to his or her normal physiological state. The opposite side of that coin is the fact that developed countries, those in Europe, for example, in the US, we have access to abundant amounts of calories at any given nanosecond in time. So you may end up actually over-consuming protein. That has no health benefits, and you can actually cause a lot of problems due to obesity. So here's a question. Is there a link between protein intake and heart disease? That video will tell you more, and we're also going to be talking about homocysteine. So that is an amino acid, and more recent research indicates that elevated levels of homocysteine may actually be a risk factor for heart disease. It's still unclear what can raise those levels and whether or not those levels are a cause of heart disease or an effect of heart disease, but there seems to be a correlation between increased levels of homocysteine and CVD. So until researchers can actually figure out the exact role of homocysteine and what it is with relative to heart disease, it's hard to determine what's actually going on. And then what about coffee's role? And what about low levels of vitamin B consumption? And what about plant versus animal proteins? Do any of those play a role in terms of protein and heart disease? To be determined. And sometimes research says yes, and sometimes research says no. So you can't really easily separate the effect of protein or fats relative to cancer. There is some research that indicates there's a correlation between excessive intakes of animal protein and various cancers, ones that are listed there. But a correlation does not mean there's a causation. We do know that protein intake increases the excretion of calcium. And that's associated with the protein intake being high because the diets that are high in protein are generally pretty low in the consumption of fruits and vegetables. And consumption of proteins sort of favored production of acid in the body. And what does the skeleton do? Well, we need to buffer the acid, so the skeleton releases calcium in order to help buffer the increase in acidity levels. So if you're eating a high protein diet, you can actually help lessen that acidity by consuming more fruits and more veg. So protein-rich food in the diet, if they're animal proteins, they can be associated with pretty high levels of lipids. That can contribute to obesity and all of its associated and correlated health risks. Weight loss diets, on the other hand, that encourage high protein intake, in general, aren't terribly effective, especially over the long term. So, high protein diets and the kidneys. You want your kidneys to be happy and healthy and functioning to the very day that you move off the planet or out of this life. Having healthy kidneys is crucial to being healthy yourself. They have to process and excrete nitrogen, which they usually do in the form of urea, which we talked about in another section. And a diet that's high in protein really increases the workload that the kidneys have to do. So especially for those who have any kidney disease, the best way to slow the progression of that disease is to really restrict any excess dietary protein consumption. So that's the RDA of protein. It's 0.8 grams per kilogram of healthy body weight, which is about 10% of your total caloric intake. Let's talk about protein and amino acid supplements. Because I read a bunch of different magazines on different topics, and I see all of these amino acid and protein supplements being touted. Take this, best one ever, great for your health, blah, blah, blah. And I also know that there are people who are weightlifters who take it. They think, yeah, that's going to help me build muscle. Dieters may take them thinking they're going to help me lose weight. Some people take them to cure herpes, other medical ailments. I have insomnia, I have depression. Do they work? Let's look into that. Protein supplements themselves don't work in miracles, and they can actually be harmful. The way to build muscle is by exercising. Protein supplements don't build your muscle. Virtually all athletes don't really need them. One of the issues is that they will often contain sort of these single amino acids that don't occur naturally in foods and don't offer any benefits to you physiologically. So the GI tract and the intestinal cells aren't really designed to handle high concentrations and weird combinations of amino acids that you find in a lot of supplements. And here's an issue. You actually need carrier proteins to get amino acids from the inside of the lumen of the digestive tract into the cell, and then out of the cell into the circulatory system. And if you are consuming an excess of a single type or a limited number of amino acids, you can actually create such a demand for that protein carrier to get that amino acid into cells. You can't absorb other amino acids that you need because the carriers are too busy. So you can end up with protein deficiencies because of that. And you might actually end up with toxicity of amino acids. So there are a couple of cases where the suggestions or recommendations or health claims of amino acids have led to their widespread use. In other words, things like glycine to prevent or relieve infections that are associated with herpes. Cold sores is one of them. And tryptophan, does that relieve pain? Does it relieve depression? Does it help with insomnia? Glycine actually may help suppress herpes in some people, not everybody, and it appears to be safe. Tryptophan has been shown to be effective with helping people control their pain levels or manage their pain levels and improve their sleep. But it's not clear that it does enough to make taking it worthwhile. So here's a study that I found. There were 1,500 people taking pretty high doses of tryptophan, and a large portion of them ended up with eosinophilia myalgia syndrome, which includes having severe muscle pain and extremely high fever, and 37 of those people died. Moderation in all things. You heard me say that, and I'll say it again. So really, the use of these amino acid supplementations or these protein supplements, it's not appropriate for most people, especially for the populations that are listed there. If you're going to take a supplement like this, make sure you are under the guidance and supervision of a healthcare practitioner. There are going to be 3 videos here. This one, protein combining myth. And you need to eat protein to be fit. And for those of you who are interested in gluten, what is it? There you go. Enjoy.